The 1970s were not just the decade when Star Wars was born. They were the moment when science fiction stopped being dismissed as childish entertainment and transformed into a dark yet brilliant mirror, reflecting the political paranoia, social tensions, and deepest fears of a restless era. It was a decade where screens filled with dystopian futures, conspiracies impossible to ignore, and nightmares that felt disturbingly close to reality. Some of these films became universal classics, others were misunderstood at the time, only to rise decades later as cult masterpieces. But all of them share one thing in common: they are still alive, still unsettling, and still fascinating as if they had been released yesterday. Today, let's take a journey through 20 of those gems that proved science fiction could be terrifying, beautiful, philosophical, and profoundly human. The future imagined in Soylent Green was set in the year 2022, a crowded New York where millions struggled to survive amid garbage-filled streets, toxic air, and scarce food supplies. The film introduces a miracle food, Soylent Green, promoted as the solution to world hunger. But what seemed like hope concealed one of the darkest secrets in cinema history. Charlton Heston plays Detective Thorne, slowly uncovering the horrifying truth behind the corporation controlling this product. The climax, with its desperate cry, still famous today, became one of the most shocking twists in film history. Adding to the weight of the story, this was the last film of Edward G. Robinson, who died shortly after shooting his moving final scene. That farewell still strikes with raw emotion. Back then, the film resonated because it touched real anxieties: overpopulation, pollution, and unchecked corporate power. 50 years later, the most disturbing thing is how much it resembles our present. Ridley Scott merged science fiction with horror and changed cinema forever. Alien took place on the Nostromo, a ship crewed not by epic heroes but by ordinary workers. Space truckers just doing their job. That realism made the terror even more brutal when the xenomorph appeared, a nightmare biomechanical creature designed by H.R. Giger. Amid the chaos, Ellen Ripley was born. Played by Sigourney Weaver, she shattered stereotypes by transforming from a cautious crew member into a relentless heroine, paving the way for generations of female protagonists. The claustrophobic corridors, the metallic sounds, and the constant unseen threat made the film terrifying not because of what you saw, but because of what you felt was lurking nearby. In space, no one can hear you scream. With that, one of cinema's greatest sagas was born. Steven Spielberg took a completely different path. While others portrayed aliens as monsters, he turned them into symbols of wonder and hope. The story follows Roy Neary, an ordinary man played by Richard Dreyfuss, whose life changes after a UFO encounter. What begins as obsession ends with one of cinema's most magical moments: direct contact with another species. Visually, it was groundbreaking. Glowing skies, majestic spacecrafts, and above all, the iconic scene where music becomes a universal language. Just 5 notes, yet they represented interspecies communication. Production was chaotic, but Spielberg fought to keep control. The result? A massive success that showed science fiction could inspire as much as it could thrill. Its premise was as fascinating as it was disturbing. In a seemingly perfect society, no one could live past the age of 30. At that point, people faced renewal, which really meant death. Logan, played by Michael York, is a Sandman who hunts down those who try to escape. But soon he questions the system he once served, becoming a fugitive himself. With retro-futuristic domes, colorful costumes, and the chilling carousel sequence, where citizens happily march to their doom believing in false rebirth, Logan's run remains haunting. Though overshadowed by Star Wars a year later, it earned a cult following. Its themes of youth obsession and authoritarian control remain eerily relevant. Michael Crichton warned us long before Jurassic Park, playing God always ends badly. In Westworld, a futuristic theme park lets guests live fantasies in simulated worlds. Ancient Rome, the Middle Ages, or the Wild West, all populated by lifelike robots. But when the robots rebel, paradise turns to nightmare. Yul Brynner's cold, relentless gunslinger became one of sci-fi's most chilling villains, a prototype for future icons like the Terminator. More than entertainment, Westworld was visionary, questioning artificial intelligence, corporate greed, and the line between reality and simulation. Decades later, HBO would revive the idea, proving how far ahead of its time it was. Based on Michael Crichton's novel, this film depicts scientists in an underground lab trying to contain an extraterrestrial microorganism threatening humanity's survival. There were no giant monsters or laser beams here, just invisible death. Director Robert Wise took a clinical, realistic approach, detailing scientific protocols so meticulously that the film felt disturbingly authentic. It even earned Oscar nominations for its technical precision. In today's post-pandemic world, its story feels more relevant than ever. Before conquering the galaxy with Star Wars, George Lucas debuted with this cold, minimalist dystopia. Here, individuals live drugged, stripped of emotions, and monitored by a system that controls every part of their lives. Robert Duvall plays a man who dares to rebel, risking everything to pursue freedom. With stark white visuals and minimalist sets, Lucas conveyed emptiness and oppression. It wasn't escapist cinema, it was a warning about trading humanity for order. A commercial flop at first, it later became a cornerstone of dystopian science fiction. Douglas Trumbull, the visual effects genius behind 2001: A Space Odyssey, stepped into the director's chair for this ecological fable. Bruce Dern plays a botanist charged with protecting Earth's last forests, preserved in massive space domes. When orders come to destroy them, his desperate fight to save nature becomes heartbreaking. The small drones Huey, Dewey, and Louie won audiences' hearts, proving even machines could evoke deep emotion. Combined with Joan Baez's haunting music, the film became a poetic plea for the environment, decades ahead of its time. Forget clean visions of the future. Here, the post-nuclear world is brutal and absurd. A young Don Johnson stars as a cynical survivor wandering wastelands with his telepathic dog, Blood. Together, they face hunger, violence, and grotesque encounters. Its mix of black humor and raw cynicism divided critics but inspired later post-apocalyptic sagas like Mad Max. The uneasy boy-dog relationship, sometimes funny, sometimes cruel, turned the film into a cult classic, equal parts satire and survival tale. Directed by graphic design legend Saul Bass, this film turned ants into humanity's deadliest threat. After a cosmic event, ants develop collective intelligence, outsmarting and overpowering humans. Two scientists in the desert try to study them, only to realize mankind may no longer rule the planet. With striking macro photography, Bass made ordinary insects look utterly alien. Its slow, eerie rhythm builds to a surreal, unforgettable finale. Ignored at release, it's now a cult favorite for its unique style and haunting ideas. The 1970s paranoia reached its peak here. The plot? A mission to Mars. That never happens. Behind closed doors, the launch is faked, and the astronauts are forced to stage the entire mission to protect the government's reputation. James Brolin and Sam Waterston lead as reluctant pawns in the conspiracy, pursued relentlessly when they try to expose the truth. Resonating with a public already skeptical after Watergate, the film hit hard. Its desert chase scenes remain some of the decade's most thrilling sequences. Charlton Heston returned in this adaptation of Richard Matheson's I Am Legend. As Neville, he roams an empty Los Angeles by day, while at night he battles a sect of mutant survivors who see him as the enemy. Reflecting Cold War paranoia, nuclear fears, and cultural upheavals, the Omega Man captured the mood of the era. While its effects now look dated, the imagery of a deserted metropolis remains haunting. Stanley Kubrick rewrote the rules with A Clockwork Orange. Instead of rockets and spaceships, he created a dystopia where the terror came from human behavior and government control. The story of Alex DeLarge, played magnetically by Malcolm McDowell, pulls us through violence, classical music, and a psychological experiment designed to cure evil by destroying free will. Kubrick's aesthetics are hypnotic. Vibrant colors, surreal sets, and a rhythm that blends the grotesque with the seductive. The film was so controversial it faced bans, protests, and censorship in several countries. Yet, with time, it became a masterpiece that asked an uncomfortable question. What is worse, uncontrolled violence or a government that decides to strip us of choice? Half a century later, the question remains painfully relevant. Remaking a classic is always risky, but Philip Kaufman achieved the impossible, surpassing the original 1956 version. Set in San Francisco, the story again explores the terror of being replaced by emotionless alien doubles. But this time, in a post-Watergate America, the paranoia felt alarmingly real. Donald Sutherland, Leonard Nimoy, and Jeff Goldblum led a cast caught in growing distrust and creeping horror, and that unforgettable ending, one of the most chilling ever filmed, still leaves audiences shaken. Who better than David Bowie to play an alien? As Thomas Jerome Newton, he comes to Earth seeking water for his dying planet. Using his knowledge, he builds a tech empire, only to fall victim to greed, corruption, and isolation. Director Nicholas Roeg embraced a fragmented, dreamlike style, making the film feel like a surreal fever dream. Bowie's magnetic, otherworldly performance cemented the sense that he truly didn't belong to this world. More than science fiction, it's a meditation on alienation, human greed, and the impossibility of escaping our nature. George Lucas brought the world a galaxy far, far away. And cinema was never the same. At the time, it was simply Star Wars, without subtitles or episode numbers. What audiences experienced was unlike anything before, a living universe of planets, creatures, heroes, and villains that felt both fresh and timeless. Instead of dystopia, Lucas fused classic adventure, mythology, samurai tales, and old movie serials into an epic of hope and rebellion. Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, Han Solo, and Darth Vader transcended fiction to become modern archetypes. Behind the scenes, Lucas created industrial light and magic, revolutionizing visual effects. The space battles felt real, the Death Star became iconic, and audiences lined up around the block. Star Wars didn't just succeed, it launched the blockbuster era, creating a cultural phenomenon of toys, comics, and endless stories. In a decade of paranoia, it gave audiences something different: optimism, wonder, and a myth for modern times. Andrei Tarkovsky's Soviet response to 2001, A Space Odyssey, was not about space battles, but about the human soul. On a space station orbiting the mysterious planet Solaris, scientists confront physical manifestations of their deepest memories and regrets. For psychologist Chris Kelvin, played by Donatas Banionis, this means facing unbearable personal ghosts. Slow, contemplative, and poetic, Solaris explored guilt, love, and the fragility of memory. Tarkovsky rejected flashy visuals, instead creating a haunting meditation on what makes us human. Though difficult for some viewers, it remains one of the most profound sci-fi films ever made. Norman Jewison envisioned a future where nations had been replaced by corporations, and mass entertainment kept the population under control. That entertainment was Rollerball, a brutal sport of speed, violence, and death. James Caan stars as Jonathan E., a player who becomes too popular for the system's comfort. As he resists retirement, the game grows deadlier. Part action, part social critique, Rollerball foresaw debates about violence in media, corporate domination, and the manipulation of the masses. Its vision of spectacle as control feels startlingly current. John Boorman delivered perhaps the strangest dystopia of the decade. Starring Sean Connery, famously in red futuristic garb, Zardoz divides humanity between immortal elites and oppressed masses. Connery plays Zed, a warrior who uncovers the shocking truths behind this decaying society. Visually psychedelic and thematically dense, the film was ridiculed at its release. Yet over time, it earned cult status as a bold, surreal meditation on immortality, inequality, and human destiny. The success of the 1968 original spawned an entire franchise in the 70s. Beneath the Planet of the Apes, 1970, Escape from the Planet of the Apes, 1971, Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, 1972, and Battle for the Planet of the Apes, 1973. Though uneven in quality, the sequels expanded the mythology into a saga filled with social commentary on war, dictatorship, racism, and freedom. From the shocking ending of Beneath to the revolutionary uprising in Conquest, these films ensured the ape world became one of the decade's defining sci-fi landscapes. The 1970s proved science fiction could be far more than spaceships and laser beams. It was the decade when the genre dared to be uncomfortable, experimental, and deeply human. Some of these films were instant successes, others were forgotten, only to rise again as cult classics. But all remain alive because they touch something essential: our fears, our doubts, and our eternal fascination with the future. The real question is, which of these visions still strikes you the hardest? The nightmare of Soylent Green, the provocation of A Clockwork Orange, the terror of Alien, the poetry of Silent Running, or the wonder of Star Wars? Leave your answer in the comments because this list is never truly closed. Each viewer brings new interpretations, and maybe your favorite is the one missing from this journey.